I'm Clay Kellogg, Terminal's Chief Executive Officer, and today I have the great pleasure of moderating the second of our three-part Fireside Chat series, State of Engineering, Growth During Economic Uncertainty. Our goal with this series is to let leading operators share what is working for them and what challenges they are experiencing in this quickly changing and dynamic time. I'm thrilled today to be joined by engineering leaders that have long histories of scaling companies through both hypergrowth and multiple downturns. First off, I'd like to introduce Scott Wong, Vice President of Platform Engineering at Credit Karma, where he leads several engineering disciplines ranging from core frameworks and platform services to developer efficiency and site reliability. Scott has over 20 years of helping hypergrowth companies like Twitter and Google grow their products to massive operational scale. Joining Scott, we have Don Neufeld, CEO of VPE Coach, a coaching and training company that focuses on leadership development for engineering teams. Don draws on his experience as CTO of Medium, Vice President at ClassPass, Vice President of Engineering at Chartboost, and as a founder himself to help engineering leadership at all stages of company growth. I'm excited for all three speakers today, as they all have experience in multiple companies and at multiple stages of growth. And as we speak today, and for reference for the audience, Credit Karma, which was acquired by Intuit in 2020, has a team of around 800 engineers. And VPE Coach is advising a full spectrum of companies from early stage startups all the way to public companies like Cisco. Different and well-rounded perspectives on building engineering teams in this current climate. So to start, let's start the high level. We all know that the economic climate in 2022 is very different than where we were a year ago. And yet the latest BLS data from August states that unemployment rate for software developers in the United States is still an extremely low 2.3%. We all know we have inflation concerns, valuation corrections. How has all this kind of dynamic and uncertain market changed or shifted your hiring goals for the remainder of this year and for next year? Maybe Scott, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. Certainly even the last couple of months have really changed the environment for us as well. I think earlier this year, hiring was around how can we get the talent and pipelines together to actually hire. Now it's shifted very quickly to, many people don't want to leave their jobs. So how can you actually make it more enticing to leave this time and when the economy is as it is and changes that they need to make? That's hard. And then retention is obviously becoming very, very important. How do we keep the people that are in the office today and keep them working as our priorities are changing in the company?
Don, in the companies that you're advising, what are you seeing from their talent acquisition strategies? How have those changed over the last 12 months?
Well, I think it really depends on where the companies are in their funding cycle. Companies that are at a point where they need to extend their runway are definitely changing their posture, reducing hiring, potentially reducing headcount overall. But there are a lot of companies that are early in their funding cycle who have been able to land funding in the last 6 months, and they're seeing opportunities. They're trying to scale their teams rapidly, take advantage of talent that's on the market, and also retain the talent that they've been able to acquire so far. So I think, especially in the early stage, it's highly dependent on where the company is financially.
As we think about building talent pipelines, Scott, in a world where it's a little bit more difficult to entice potential employees, how have you guys approached, presenting, Credit Karma in a light where it will still attract those employees to maybe leave something that is stable, comfortable, and move over to Credit Karma?
Yeah, I mean, I think that something that hasn't changed even for this year, one of the things we really tout is our culture. We can show it through many of our engineering groups have been here for very long tenure because they really, really enjoy the culture here at Credit Karma. So we tout that a lot. We also think a lot about a lot of the benefits we provide to people, from work-life balance to how we actually have them grow. We drive that a lot home to them, and we feel like that's actually a very compelling story for a lot of engineers. The other third part, obviously, is just our growth, right? We have a lot of new exciting things that we want to go build. And we have a lot of new areas in the fintech world that we want to go build them out. And so we feel like as a market leader there, we can really kind of encourage engineers to challenge themselves.
Don, again, across your clients, what are you telling maybe the later stage or the larger clients as they think about also, thinking about trying to attract maybe larger numbers of clients, larger numbers of employees, and are also dealing with the fact that people might be less likely to move?
Well, I think while people may have some reticence to put themselves on the open market right now, I think that there's also a real opportunity right now to be able to get talent out of big tech, because not everyone has been trued up to compensate for the decline in their equity compensation. And this is actually very favorable for folks who are trying to hire, because the more senior a person tends to be, the larger the percentage of their compensation tends to be in equity. And so for companies that are looking to hire senior and up engineers, cold outreach to people who are sitting there quietly dissatisfied with the fact that their compensation's gone down significantly can really, unlock talent that you didn't know was out there.
When you are thinking about growing teams now and the fact that we are in this different environment, are there different qualities you're looking for in the employees now that when you're doing outreach? Is there anything in particular that for you or for any of the clients you're working with, Don, that you point them to?
In terms of what makes a great engineer in this market?
Yeah.
Working primarily with startups, I think that one of the things that's key in engineers is an ability to function well under uncertainty. And it is very true that not every engineer can do this. Startups, really all stages, are going to go through some level of product direction churn, trying to find fit, trying to optimize the product. And so the more capable an engineer is at thriving in that uncertain environment, the more likely they're going to succeed. And interestingly enough, it's an uncertain market out there. So those people have kind of a double advantage, in that they are, intrinsically more valuable and also more capable of dealing with the uncertainty that's happening in the macroeconomic situation.
Scott, for you, anything that you look for, any qualities that you look for today that might be potentially different than they were a year ago?
I mean, I think there's obviously skills, technical skills. We feel like, those areas, some are harder than others to find. And a lot of that can be coupled with training or mentoring. One of the areas I think we really focus on is engineers' curiosity. So from a perspective of, hey, if you're newer in your career, are they really engaged in wanting to learn something new? Are they bringing in ideas, even in the interview conversations? And then on the more senior level, are they used to mentoring younger engineers? Do they have that curiosity to really help others, be a multiple? We think about that a lot during interviews, and we look for that quality, which is not always great and easy to find in interviews, but if they have that energy, it's someone we really want to hire.
Has this market encouraged either Credit Karma or Don, any of your clients, to start thinking more broadly about talent? So are we thinking now that we have remote work is obviously more prevalent than it's been, in history? A lot of the barriers that have been in place historically in terms of building teams have been lessened. Are you finding that talent in other markets? Are you approaching new markets that you might not have approached in the past?
Yeah, for Credit Karma at least, and this was pre-economy downturn, pre-COVID, we made some bets to just be in a different market. We were primarily here in the Bay Area for the first, I'd say, 12 years we were here. We were looking for lower cost markets to attain talent. So we actually made some investments in Charlotte, so out of North Carolina, where they did have some history in fintech. So there was some relevance there, and really started tapping that market. And we've had a lot of success. It's not as large as our Oakland headquarters, but it's definitely the fastest growing. And we have a couple hundred engineers out there now. And so we feel like there's a lot of value of untapped, both from just new talent as well as diverse talent is coming out of Charlotte.
Yeah, I think I've really seen many more companies open to remote work. And I think we're also getting to a point in the cycle where people are starting to feel the real impact of that in both sort of positive and negative dimensions. Uh, One thing that's coming up a lot in conversations is strategic alignment. Is, do the teams feel like they're a team, or do they feel like, we're just kind of a bunch of people that, we get together for a meeting once a week or twice a week? Because you miss so much of the casual interactions that make a team a team. And so I think that there's simultaneously a real desire to take advantage of the opportunities of remote and an increasing awareness of the significant costs that really demands more of leadership to be able to fill the gap that was previously being addressed through all of these informal interactions that just happened in real time in person.
That's a really good point, Don. And one thing that you mentioned earlier, Scott, was rethinking kind of benefits in this new world, and thinking through how we have to approach, really thinking about the entire employee experience, really, in a remote world. But before we jump there, Scott, Credit Karma is well known for really encouraging and being a leader as it relates to kind of a hybrid office experience, really trying to bring back some of the benefits of that in-office experience, but also allow some flexibility. I'm curious, as you think about building talent pipelines, has that been a positive or a negative in terms of gaining access to talent?
We've always had the philosophy of flexible workforce. So, hey, life is crazy. Things happen in work. You should have the flexibility to work from home on a day that's planned or unplanned. We've always had that and encouraged our engineers. And we think that's a benefit, right? We feel like it's part of our culture of having that work-life balance. But we do highly value in person. So we do want people to come together, on a regular basis in office to meet and actually build those relationships. And we think that's valuable. When the people come in here and learn and understand that, they really like it and they enjoy it.
Don, I'm curious, from your perspective, dealing with, many different clients, some started as remote companies or started as completely distributed. They're never going to have that benefit of potentially bringing more junior employees into a headquarter, if you will. How are you advising them to really kind of start to, encourage that curiosity, encourage that training that can happen when it has to be a little bit more intentional?
Yeah, there's certainly things that you can do, and I'm noticing we're doing a recorded session here. That's actually a tool that I recommend that senior engineers try to leverage. Of, if you're onboarding a new engineer, don't just have the conversation. Press record on Zoom, capture that learning, so that you can start to develop a library of reusable artifacts and help people, take advantage of all the investments we've made in the past, get something out of them now. That's probably one of the biggest things that companies can do today to make this better. One of the techniques that I'm seeing people use, frankly, is actually not hiring at a junior level very much when they're fully remote. It will run out of gas at some point. You cannot build, 1,000-person engineering team out of just senior and up.
Right. I think that one of the things that we've seen at Terminal is that there are many markets where that mid-level to senior level engineer has great experience, where they came out of university, got their first couple of years experience in market, and are now ready for that more remote experience. They're excited about the opportunity to be more involved in product and more involved in a product decision, involved in the strategy that is being deployed. But I think one of the things that we find is that when you're talking about, experienced engineers, you do start to have questions about how are you creating an environment that makes it welcoming for me if I'm a fully remote employee, if I'm a hybrid employee. And so one of the things we want to circle back on is the benefits that we're talking about now in this very flexible world, how are you positioning, or Don, how are you advising your clients to think through sort of a remote friendly or remote first benefits world?
One of the things that you can do is go to a almost cash-based flexible type of approach. For example, health savings accounts as a replacement for a specific health insurance plan, et cetera. There are some options here, and I'm seeing more remote companies sort of lean into allocating a budget per person and then allowing the person to purchase directly the things that they can get in their particular geography.
So there are states where we've targeted, we think there's actually high talent in those states. We've then certified those states, Texas being one of them, Washington being one of them, obviously North Carolina, and we think we can get talent there. And so like if we do find folks who, want to be remote, they're high talent, they're highly someone we want, we say like, well, these are one of the green states you could be in. And so that's how we kind of manage it, and hopefully a benefit for them as well.
Is there anything in terms of actual sort of benefits packages, though, that you are now offering that maybe you weren't, 5 years ago, that is really targeted toward a more, flexible, more hybrid, or fully remote employee?
Going back to this sort of like budget, cash type basis, I think that the tax advantages you get when you have a small employee base are smaller. And so small employers are more incentivized to just say, hey, look, like here's some money. It's taxable comp to you. Go do with it what you will. Because the amount we're going to be able to save if we actually create a program and this is a tax advantage, it ends up being relatively small numbers versus a larger employer. So I think that this is something that's maybe emerging right now in the smaller companies to be able to use that type of very flexible approach.
Yeah. We've seen, everything from stipends for setting up home offices to enhanced health benefits that are focused on, working from home, whether that's mental health, physical health, obviously ergonomic assessments, things along those lines, that all are focused on ensuring that, even when you don't have someone in office or you don't have elements of control that come with office, you're providing that, that baseline of health for your employees. But let's shift gears a little bit and start talking about the flip side of attracting new talent and more about retention of the existing team. We've heard the press is constantly commenting on this is the quiet quitting era. We have your burnout is front and center with a lot of engineering teams. How are you approaching retention in today's environment, Scott, for your teams at Credit Karma?
Yeah, a couple of things I think to think about. I kind of mentioned it on the whole education and growing. We want to put a lot of emphasis on being diligent on engineers' growth. That's from a manager's perspective of like, hey, do we have a good talent planning for that engineer, and where are they on their spectrum of their career? And then continue. I mean, engineers want to build things, right? So continue to put in front of them challenging problems, right? So we don't create problems for problems, but we want to have something in front of them that they really are going to engage with, right? Something that's technical and in the technology side. From a compensation perspective, one thing that we implemented a couple of years ago was this concept of no matter what level you're at, everyone gets paid the same, right? So there's equitable pay across the level, which is, a little irregular, certainly in the Bay Area as well, where, you have an incentive to get in, you get a sign-on, you get all these things. And for some reason, some staff gets paid here and other staff gets paid here. Over the years, they're doing similar work, right? So we're very upfront that we want to pay the same regardless at any level. We think that's something that, people can feel good about in terms of the work they're doing and what they're being performed against. Those are two areas. I think from a perspective, we talked about a lot remote work. Managers really need to think about employees' productivity, right? So regardless if they're in office or out of office, what should I be expecting from this engineer? And how can I actually measure that productivity? It's been obviously a concept that folks have talked about for a while, but we're trying to get some basics around that to understand that and how to measure that. So we know what's above the line, below the line for an engineer.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that there's so many things here around leadership and the need for good leadership and good management in a remote first world. Um, why do people feel uninspired and burned out? Well, if they don't feel like their work has meaning, right? If they haven't understood why that the company is doing what it's doing, it's very difficult for them to feel that this matters, unless maybe they're adding some new technical gizmo that they really like get off on. There's so much opportunity here for leaders to help retain people by helping them understand what's really going on, trusting them with the why behind the what. And so that is, I think, one of the most powerful tools that you have available for retention. And of course, obviously, people need to be compensated fairly. We are in an area of increasing legal frameworks around disclosing compensation. This is happening. How far will it go? We don't know. Are we going to end up in a world where the salaries and other compensation elements are an open book? I think it's healthy to ask yourself the question, right, if that was true, what would happen? Who would object and why? Because that's a problem that exists. It's just not known right now. So as a leader, getting out in front of that, and I really love what you guys are doing over there, Scott, in terms of equity. You've taken a position on that. People know, and that means they can stop thinking about it and they can focus on the rest of the work.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, leadership's really, really important. I feel that, I think there's a formula for small companies, right? Everyone knows what everyone's doing, and there's a connection between what they're working on every day. And so when you get bigger and larger, you want to keep that feel. You want every engineer at every level of leadership to know what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I think that's even more important in this hybrid flex remote world where they maybe aren't as connected. They're not in the office. They don't hear something in the coffee room. How do you do that as leaders at every level is super, super important, and being transparent about it.
Yeah, it's hard. It takes work.
It's hard, and it requires really constant communication, right? Because you have to have, everyone needs to, you almost have to be a broken record of why we're doing this, what we're doing. I'm curious, as you are thinking about, retention and, keeping the teams motivated, what are there any tools, tricks, tips that you can share with the folks today on how you're doing that? How are you keeping everybody in the loop? How are you keeping that, everyone rowing in the same direction when they might not be in the same office? They might not be in the same, they might all be working from home in different time zones, different, different experiences in their lives.
One for us. I mean, I don't know if it's specific to this environment, but we've really started to think a lot more about recognition and appreciation of the employees, and so that, really asking my manager to think about how does that individual like to be recognized and appreciated, and then we're starting to tune that. Some are very private recognition things, and it might be a lunch or a dinner with an engineer. Some are very public. It's all hands, all company, embarrassing the person of how well they did. And there's a bunch of stuff in between, right? I start traveling a lot now to all the offices to actually start to meet everyone versus just doing a Zoom meeting. So I think putting a lot more focus on that is actually more important, and they feel more connected, regardless if it's a Zoom meeting or you're going out and meeting them in person. We're putting a lot more focus on that. And I think that's kind of important. And as leaders, again, back to leaders, right? It's up to the leaders to kind of figure out that Tetris.
Yeah, I think that's really important to acknowledge that people want to be recognized in different ways, and meeting them where they're at is a really powerful tool. I think that one thing that leaders can always deploy when they're thinking about getting alignment is not just what do I want to say, but what do I want them to take away? Okay? What is the purpose of this? The number one thing that I find when I'm looking at leadership communications is there's too much. It's not clear what you want people to take away, do differently, do next. There's a bunch of talk about what happened, where we are at, and it gets lost. Right? So thinking from the perspective of the consumer of the communication and thinking about their needs and their demands on their time and their memory, what do you really want to accomplish, can really transform how you as a leadership team communicate.
In this time of focusing on retention, how are you, we just talked, Scott, you talked about kind of recognition of achievement, but for those that are consistently higher performers, how are you approaching, those folks, especially, Scott, in a world where maybe it is all transparent and it's kind of clear what band you're in, if you will?
Yeah, our most senior engineers are always tough. They're the ones who are, I think putting on additional responsibility, giving them more exposure to the company is one area that's been successful for some of the engineers who are interested in that area. They don't want to be a manager. They want to continue to influence technology, right? But maybe they haven't had as much exposure to product or other parts of the company. So there's opportunities there outside of just like working with engineers that I feel like some folks it's helped with the most senior engineers. We've just probably tipped the scale of size where we're encouraging most of our senior engineers to think out externally. So whether it's open source projects, whether it's like influencing our technology outside either other companies directly or in conferences, we're trying to motivate them that way, right? Because they see the benefit, right? Their life may not be a Credit Karma their whole life, right? So where can we help them outside of to their next step? That's interesting for them, particularly if they're very long tenured and they've pretty much built the product since the day one. There's those areas. It's always tough to have the conversation with the engineer of like, oh, I've hit a dead end and I want to be a manager now because I think I've done everything as an engineer, right? Those are the areas that are really hard that we have like really long conversations about of why do you really want to go into leadership? And do you have leadership skills now? Can you be a staff engineer, architect engineer with the same level of influence? So those are kind of three areas that typically we kind of like move them toward to keep them engaged.
Yeah, I think when you think about the people that you want the most, right? You want those people who are high growth trajectory, who are curious, and putting together a plan for how they're going to get that at your company can be huge in terms of retention. I'm thinking about a conversation I had this morning with someone who's very senior, and they got some disappointing news. They're not going to get the next level, but they're going to stay where they're at because they're still learning. That's what they said. I'm still learning. Right? I want to stick it out. I want to figure out how to do this. That is such a powerful retention mechanism. And so I think making sure that you're investing in your top performers in that way, whatever that means to them, whether it's technical, product direction, business direction, management, help them feel that they are on a path is hugely, hugely valuable.
We do an annual survey of across our markets of engineering, engineers, everything from very early in their career, ICs, all the way through executive leadership. We ask them what's the most important thing that they look for in their job search, and they're looking for in their job. Of course, everyone is going to say compensation is kind of table stakes. That's the first. But the second is actually the product they're working on. It's not the company. It's not even the culture. It's, are they learning? Are they working on something they're excited about? And are they learning, something new, a new skill set, a new, new opportunity for growth? And I feel like that's something where a lot of companies think about it from the perspective of, hey, we need to fill a hole. We have waited till as long as we possibly can. We need to fill a hole where we need some resource, instead of thinking about, hey, how am I going to position this role as a learning opportunity for somebody who's going to come in and work hard for me for the next 2, 3, 4 years. A lot of the people who are here today are leadership from earlier stage companies that are going through both growth, some are going through growth, some are going through the retrenchment of kind of the economic climate and thinking about, kind of stretching their dollar further. What advice would you have for, let's say that Series A or Series B engineering leader who is now, tasked with continuing to build a team, but doing it in a way that is a bit more cost conscious than maybe they were 12 months ago? Scott, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to what you just stated, someone's growth from a leadership perspective also means, like, to some extent, like, what is their utilization? Are we utilizing that person's skills to the fullest? And are we, what is that level of utilization versus like hiring someone new who can also do something similar to complement? And so I think leaders really have to think through that. Are we getting the right stuff out of this engineer? Do they have the right skill sets and capabilities to do it? Can I just enhance their capabilities to do this thing, or do I have to hire someone brand new to do something? And so it is this optimization, I think, that companies need to really think about as they're hiring new, where the easier thing is just keep hiring. And that's not always the answer, particularly in this environment, right? So managers really need to think about that a lot more, and really understand their engineers, right? What's their current staffing capabilities? If they don't know that, or kind of guessing a little bit, that's dangerous, right? You could easily be in an overhiring situation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that one of the engineering manager's job is to understand their team, what they're capable of, and what they need. And I think anytime you're being asked, how can you do something with less? The natural question that comes after that is, all right, what's going to give? All right? How are we going to flex in response to this particular demand we have to save cost? And I think one of the healthy ways to do that is to say, let's try to break this roll down into what is essential and what could be an opportunity for growth for this person. Because if we say we want to have people with the ability to grow, but we also say they need to have all the skills coming in the door, we're contradicting ourselves a little bit. Right? So what are the areas where it is safest for us to take a candidate who's maybe not the unicorn that we would love, but we know we're not going to get, right? And we're going to make sure that they're well supported to grow in that way. So it's a great opportunity for them, and we can get candidates that we can afford.
Yeah, and from an engineering perspective, I think I break it down a little bit easier for some of my line managers of like, hey, you may have people younger in their career, their growth is figuring out how to run this service for this team. That's their growth. They never run a service at this scale. That's their growth curve. We've got senior engineers who can teach that person how to do that. Then as you move up the scale, there's people who want to build brand new things, right? They want to build the product, they want to scale the product, they want to do it. That's their growth curve, and that's something you need. If you don't need that right now, that may not be a hire you need. But if you do have real needs or multiple needs there, then you hire in that space. But you need balance, right, across teams. You need balance of both of those when you're hiring a team.
One of the challenges, I think, for many earlier in their career leaders or managers is eliminating some of the biases they come into their leadership position with, whether that's educational background, previous work experience background. And we've talked a lot about giving people an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to kind of flourish. How do you help Don, your clients think more broadly and not come in or knock down those biases as they're thinking about adding to their team?
I think one of the things you try to do is move from what do I want this person to have to what do I want this person to be capable of doing? Right? I don't need them to have a CS degree from a top 10 school. I need them to be able to solve problems of this shape. Right? Because once you get to that dimension, then you realize you could meet those requirements in a variety of ways. And that also helps you overcome the biases and opens up your talent pool.
Yeah, one common bias I feel like is helpful to particularly line managers who are first managers is have you gone through the process of taking someone who had many gaps, let's just say, in their skill sets, to one of the rock stars on your team? Like they have some of the highest potential. They've really come a long way in their learning curve. If a manager's gone through that, whether that's 2 quarters, 4 quarters, 2 years, then they kind of understand the potential and possibilities, and then they balance that across the team, right? You can't have all of those on a team, but you need to have a couple of those. And I feel like that's super important of understanding how to like think about your team as talent and take away the biases of where they've come from or where they're coming from a skill set.
Great. Well, one last question for you guys, and then we will finish up. We're at the end of 2022, beginning our 2023 planning across all companies of all sizes and stages. What would be your advice for those leaders of tomorrow that are beginning to go through their process right now of headcount or resource planning for 2023?
We've talked a lot about obviously tuning in skill sets and matching the skill sets to your plans, right? So whatever you want to get done, whether it's very operational, I need just to keep the services running, versus we're completely transitioning the product, we need to go build a bunch of new things. You really need to think about that relative to your current skill sets that are in the office today. We talked about utilization and their capabilities, and will they grow, and can they grow into these things? You really need to evaluate that. And then I think we mentioned earlier, right? Like really tune in. What do you need? 3 more junior engineers, or can you deal with 1 very senior engineer, right? The trade-offs from a compensation perspective could be equivalent. But what really do you need? What can move the needle for you for your planning? I think about that a lot. And don't just say, oh, I need 5 headcount. I need to double my team, for example. That is, in this environment, certainly probably not going to be useful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the idea of getting crisp on what are the problems to solve? What are the most important problems that we need to address in the next 6 months or 12 months? And then building from there how you're going to attack that from a staffing point of view is both going to get you what you need strategically and keep you lean in a time of uncertainty versus, oh, well, I have this many headcount, so let's just add 15%. A kind of a robotic, unthinking way of thinking about the future. The future is not the past. And these moments of inflection are the times when it's most important that we get those calls right and we don't just cruise on autopilot into the next 12 months.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining today. We're now going to turn it over to our audience, and if there's any questions, Natasha, take it away.
And the first question that came in today was, what do you think is the biggest cause for the shortage of engineers today? Clay, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks everyone for joining today. Apologies for the little technical difficulties there, starting the Q&A. So I think the biggest factor for really why we're having a shortage of engineering talent is that we've just had this macro shift in terms of technology investment, right? And I think it was now many years ago that Marc Andreessen said software is eating the world. Every business has software at its core now. And that has not only changed a lot of legacy industries that maybe technology didn't play a major role for, but also spurred obviously a lot of disruption and a lot of investment coming into technology companies. And so, quite frankly, the infrastructure, the education systems, the really kind of the focus on STEM and even in early education just hasn't been able to keep up. And so every year we're creating more jobs where engineering, where software development, where engineering is at the core. And there's just not enough people coming out of all of the educational systems, whether that's traditional or new educational systems, to fill those roles.
I think that this question might have a little bit more depth to it, which is, why is there a shortage of engineers that I want to hire? Because I think if you're willing to go to like entry level, or if you're willing to go look far afield, there are a lot of engineers available that there's not necessarily going to be very successful in the kind of tasks that you want them to do. The most common pattern that I see when I'm working with people is, how can I get more senior talent? I have problems getting mentors for my junior folks. I need people who can own projects end to end. They don't need so much hand holding. And those people are in incredibly high demand. And at the same time, they're burning out. I think one of the patterns that I see is you get to a certain point in your career as an engineer, and you either sort of leave the code to become more of a manager, or maybe you actually switch careers and literally buy a goat farm, because it is such a stressful job. We ask so much of our senior technical personnel, including heavy on-call responsibilities, and those people are super valuable. So they have a lot of options, and eventually we burn them out.
Great. And so the next one is kind of a follow-up to this. It's, how do you see today's developer shortage impacting the tech industry over the next 3 to 5 years? Who'd like to tackle that one first?
Why don't you start?
Sure. I think maybe in a similar way that it's impacted the last 5 years, which is that we reinvent the wheel a lot. Because we don't have the quality of senior people who know what technologies to deploy, we often build things we don't need to build. We often redo work that's already been done, and our systems are inefficient. It seems like every few years we're reinventing from first principles some combination of what we're working on and how we're doing the work. And I expect that will continue.
Well said, Don. I think we're going to see a lot of the same, and I think we have constantly been told that we're going to see new tools, new frameworks, no code environments where it's going to, or even AI that's going to kind of relegate and make it such that we don't need as many engineers, we don't need as many people in certain roles, and yet every year there's still a larger and larger gap of unfilled roles. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of what we're seeing today. I do think, Don, to your point, we are going to see, I think more of an aperture of being open to different types of talent, being open to different markets, being open to even different solutions for that gap, more so than we've ever seen before.
All right, and moving on to more about how we're going to retain existing talent. What are the perks that you have personally heard that developers get most excited about? Don, would you like to take that one first?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, like no meeting days. These cost nothing, but engineers value the ability to do deep work disproportionately to other people, and an engineer who has their calendar cut into a lot of small pieces is going to be very frustrated relative to someone who has the same amount of meeting load but distributed in a way that gives them time for deep work. And so that's one of the things that companies can do that's basically free and will unlock both more productivity and developer happiness, because engineers want to build things, and when you get in the way, that's frustrating.
Yeah, I think in the broad context, it's flexibility. And I think that flexibility cuts across how you work, where you work, and flexibility in even deciding the perks that are, or the benefits that are important to the individual, whether that is having the flexibility to have access to, whether that's mental health solutions, or whether there's physical health, or there's, the ability to be able to spend more time with family and then work on off hours. All that just comes down to, we're at a point in time where that flexibility has a tremendous amount of value to any employee. And that's where, we talk about kind of the trends of the last couple of years with remote work adoption. That I think ultimately is what will never go away. That need for flexibility, even in hybrid environments, even in, coming back into an office environment, there's always going to need that ability for people to say, hey, look, I have something in my life that I need to go take care of, and I can't be in the office today.
Yeah, I would agree that's huge. Even the ability to work somewhat offset hours can be very valuable.
Well, for sure. Let's see, the next question we have here actually is about how do I promote a collaborative environment if I'm a fully remote company?
So I think we talked a bit in the discussion earlier on the importance of leadership, right? The importance of leadership really creating that environment of collaboration. And I think that comes from one, very clear understanding of what we're working on, what's our goal, what's our mission, what's our vision, and ensuring that everyone on the team not only understands that, but is motivated by that. I think after that, it really comes down to really setting some best practices that are adopted across the company and forced across the company. And I think Don mentioned earlier, just the, ensuring that everything is, all meetings are captured on video and are able to share, making sure that documents are, open to everyone and that there's collaboration inside the documents. I think that those are just sort of core elements of just operations that you have to put in place to ensure that everyone has and feels like it's a level playing ground and everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, I think if you start with the question, how can I enable people to be more autonomous, which is maybe a little bit ironic given that you want to be more collaborative, but by virtue of being remote, you're inherently somewhat disconnected and you have periods in which you have to be able to work autonomously. It gets you to that place of some of the things Clay's talking about like knowing the why, knowing what the success criteria is and getting aligned around that. Then you can really collaborate with someone without necessarily needing to be, in constant communication with them because you agree on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And, the details you can sort of work out over time versus needing to be in the same room all the time because we actually are figuring out what we're trying to accomplish as we go. That's hard.
Now that brings us to our next question, which is, what is the biggest challenge for hiring talent offshore and what's the biggest benefit?
So I think the biggest challenge is really gaining access to the talent. I think that especially if you're, have been focused on building teams in the United States, there are tools that you use. There are avenues that you use to gain access to potential candidates and educate them on the opportunity. In other markets, those tools may not be as effective. Certainly, the communication on the opportunity is going to require customization and understanding the local market and what might be interesting to the local market. And so gaining access and having the credibility to sit in front of somebody and explain why your company is exciting, why your company with the product you're working on has rocket ship potential, what they're going to be learning on the role, in the job, and the opportunity they're going to have to really improve their skill set. All those things require that element of credibility of being in the market and that you're trustworthy. And so I think that's probably the hardest aspect. The benefits are, there are many, many benefits. One, obviously, wider access to talent. One, overall raises the overall talent bar, but two, improves your diversity across your team, improves the diversity of thought, the diversity of culture that's going to come in and be infused in the product. That's going to make it more appropriate and make it more appealing to a wider audience, as well as I think there are certainly outside the United States cost benefits to having teams in those markets. That's going to be advantageous in the environment we're in today to be able to have kind of your costs under control, stretch your dollar further, and make sure that you're building really that long-term team that's going to develop that very valuable intellectual property.
Yeah, I think it's a really complicated situation. It's definitely not as simple as flipping a switch and all of a sudden I have these offshore developers and it's working. Time zone, huge factor. I see this with a lot of teams, especially if they go outside of the Americas, that the overlap between some of their US developers and Eastern European developers is very limited, or their overlap between East Coast and India. These are some really, really tough challenges that you're then putting to your US team to be able to collaborate successfully. Another area that I think a lot of people underthink is the incentive structure. If you're thinking about long-term employees rather than project kind of based engagement, how are you going to incentivize people to put in work for the long term when your overall compensation structure is very US centric? The stock options that a company issues are very much optimized for US tax structure. They're not suitable for employees in other areas, and they may expose them actually to tax liability with no upside. These are not things that people necessarily think about when they go out to the market, and they definitely would push you towards trying to work through local partners who can help with the sourcing, who can help with managing the HR and other things that you need on sites, rather than trying to build international subsidiaries and employ them yourselves.
No, that's excellent. I think that brings us to all the questions that we had today. And I'll give everybody a couple of minutes back to their day. But thank you so much, Don and Clay, for tuning in and for your invaluable insight. I know that we all learned a lot, and I appreciate it. And for our audience, thanks so much for tuning in today for our second part of our 3-part Fireside Chat series. We have a third part of our series coming up in November. It's going to be geared towards our UK audience, and it's about how tech layoffs are impacting the developer talent gap. So I encourage everyone to join in on that as well. Otherwise, thanks so much, everyone. You guys have a great week.
Thanks, Natasha.